The message came at 3 in the morning when most of the crew was sleeping. Commander Jake was in his small room aboard the starship Valiant when his communication device started beeping. He opened his eyes and looked at the screen. What he saw made his blood run cold. The message was from the Empire. Jake sat up in his bed and read the words again. They were asking for a human to come to there. They were not asking for just any human. They were asking for him. They had used his full name. They knew who he was. This made no sense. They had never shown any interest in humans before. They were one of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. They controlled 17 star systems. Their ships could destroy entire planets. Their soldiers were tall and strong and feared by everyone, and they thought humans were weak and small and not worth their time. So why did they want to talk to him? Jake got out of bed and walked to the bridge of the ship. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Amy, was already there. She had seen the message too. "Sir, this has to be a trap," she said. Her face was pale. "They have never asked for diplomatic contact with Earth. They think we are insects." "I know," Jake replied. He stared at the message on the main screen. "But they are not threatening us. They are asking. That is strange. The message says their queen wants to meet you personally, the Empress Ra." Amy shook her head. "She is supposed to be hundreds of years old. She has conquered more worlds than we can count. Why would she want to see a human commander?" Jake did not have an answer. He spent the rest of the night thinking about what to do. By morning, he had made his decision. He would go. The chance to learn something about them was too important to pass up. And if it was a trap, well, at least Earth would know more about their enemy. The journey to the took 3 weeks. The Valiant traveled through 5 different star systems, passing through space that belonged to the Empire. Patrol ships watched them the whole way but did not attack. They had been given permission to pass. Jake spent most of the trip in his room, reading everything humans knew about them. It was not much. They were a reptilian species with scales covering their bodies. They had 4 eyes instead of 2. They were much taller than humans, some of them reaching 8 feet. Their technology was far ahead of anything Earth had built. Their empire had existed for thousands of years. But there were gaps in the information. No human had ever been to there. No human had ever met their queen. Jake would be the first. When the Valiant finally reached Prime, Jake stood on the bridge and looked at the planet through the main window. It was a dark world, covered in purple clouds. Lightning flashed in the atmosphere. It looked angry and dangerous. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Amy said, but her voice was filled with fear, not wonder. The ship descended through the clouds. Below them, the capital city appeared. Jake had never seen anything like it. The buildings were made of black crystal that reached up toward the sky like fingers. The streets glowed with strange light. Everything was perfect and cold and terrifying. They landed on a platform made of some metal that Jake did not recognize. The moment the ship touched down, a squad of soldiers marched toward them. They wore black armor and carried weapons that hummed with energy. Jake took a deep breath and walked down the ramp to meet them. The soldiers were even bigger than he had expected. The tallest one looked down at him with 4 yellow eyes. Its face showed no emotion. "Commander," the soldier said. Its voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "The Empress will see you now. You will come alone." Jake looked back at his ship, at Amy standing in the doorway. She looked like she wanted to stop him, but they both knew she could not. "I will be fine," Jake said, though he was not sure if he believed it. He followed the soldiers into the palace. The hallways were long and dark, lit only by floating orbs of cold blue light. The walls were covered with images and symbols that Jake did not understand. Some of them showed battles. Some showed planets being destroyed. Some showed the flag flying over ruined cities. They passed through door after door, going deeper into the palace. Jake noticed that there were no windows. He had no idea how far underground they had gone. Finally, they reached a massive door made of black metal. Strange symbols were carved into its surface. The soldiers stopped. "Beyond this door is the throne room," the lead soldier said. "You will show respect to the Empress. You will not speak unless she asks you to speak. You will not move unless she tells you to move. Do you understand?" Jake nodded. His heart was beating so fast he could feel it in his throat. The doors opened slowly, and Jake stepped inside. The throne room was the largest space he had ever seen. The ceiling was so high that it disappeared into darkness. Pillars made of bone and crystal lined the walls, and at the far end, sitting on a throne made of black stone, was Empress Ra. She was terrifying. Her scales were darker than the night sky, and they seemed to drink in the light around her. Her 4 eyes burned with a golden fire that seemed to see right through him. A crown made from the bones of her enemies sat on her head. She was tall, even sitting down, and power radiated from her like heat from a fire. Jake walked toward her, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He stopped at the bottom of the steps that led to her throne and bowed his head. "Your Majesty," he said, "I am honored by your invitation." The Empress studied him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice filled the entire room like thunder rolling across an empty plain. "Commander, you are smaller than I expected. Your species always is." Jake raised his head and looked at her. He was afraid, but he refused to show it. "We may be small, Your Majesty, but we have traveled far to be here." The Empress made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Yes, you have. And do you know why I called you here, little human? Do you know what I want from you?" "No, Your Majesty. Your message did not explain." Ra rose from her throne and began walking down the steps toward him. Each step she took made Jake want to run, but he forced himself to stand still. She stopped just a few feet away from him, looking down at him with those burning eyes. "I have a request for you, Commander. A dark request. One that has made beings much stronger than you weep with fear and run away screaming." Jake swallowed hard. "What is this request?" The Empress leaned closer, and Jake could smell something strange on her breath, like storms and ancient dust. "My empire is dying," she whispered, "and only a human can save it." Jake stared at the Empress. He was sure that he had heard her wrong. The Empire was the most powerful force in the known galaxy. Their ships numbered in the thousands. Their soldiers were the best trained in all of space. Their technology could do things that humans could only dream about. How could such an empire be dying? "I do not understand, Your Majesty," Jake said carefully. "Your empire seems stronger than any other. You have conquered more worlds than any species in history." Ra looked at him for a long moment, then something changed in her face. The hard expression softened just a little. For just a second she looked tired, old, sad. "What you see is a mask, Commander, a beautiful painting covering a wall that is falling apart." She turned away from him and walked toward a large window at the side of the throne room. "Come, walk with me. What I am about to tell you, I have told no other outsider." She waved her clawed hand, and the soldiers who had been standing in the shadows left the room. Their footsteps echoed and then faded to silence. Jake was alone with the most powerful being in the galaxy. He followed her through a small door behind the throne. They entered a private hallway that was much simpler than the grand spaces he had seen before. The walls here were plain stone, and Jake noticed cracks running through them. No one had fixed them. "They are an ancient species," the Empress said as they walked. "We were building great cities when your ancestors were still living in caves. We traveled to the stars when your kind had not yet discovered fire. We conquered and built and ruled for thousands and thousands of years." She stopped at a window that looked out over the city. The crystal towers stood tall and beautiful in the purple light, but now Jake noticed something. Many of the buildings looked empty. There were very few people on the streets below. "And then we stopped," the Empress continued. "We became so perfect that we forgot how to grow. Our children are born fewer and fewer each year. Our scientists no longer create new things. They only keep the old machines running. Our artists have not made anything new in centuries. Our philosophers have stopped asking questions." She turned to face him, and Jake saw something in her eyes that shocked him. It was fear. "We are a species that has forgotten how to live, Commander. We breathe, we eat, we exist, but we are not truly alive anymore. And in 3 or 4 generations, there will be no left at all. We will fade away like a fire that has run out of wood to burn." Jake did not know what to say. This was the last thing he had expected. The great enemy of humanity, the terror of the galaxy, was slowly dying from the inside. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Why me? Why a human?" The Empress began walking again, and Jake followed her. They entered a room filled with strange machines. Screens covered the walls, showing images and data that Jake could not read. "We have been watching your species since you first left your home planet," Ra said. "At first, we thought you were just another weak species that would destroy itself before it could become a problem. You fight wars among yourselves. You make terrible decisions. You are ruled by emotions instead of logic." "All of that is true," Jake admitted. "But you did not destroy yourselves. Instead, you grew stronger. You spread across the stars, and you did something that we cannot do anymore." The Empress pressed a button, and the screens changed. They now showed images of Earth, of humans building, creating, exploring. You kept changing, you kept dreaming, you kept making new things. She pointed at one screen that showed a human artist painting a picture. Another showed scientists working in a laboratory. Another showed children playing in a field. "In the last 100 years, your species has created more new art, new music, new ideas, and new inventions than they have created in 10,000 years. You have something inside you that we have lost. A fire, a hunger, a refusal to accept that anything is impossible." Jake looked at the images of his people. He had never thought about humanity this way. Humans always felt so small compared to species like but now he was seeing things from a different angle. "There is something else about humans that we have studied," the Empress continued. "You fail all the time. You try things and they do not work. You make mistakes. You fall down." She paused. "And then you get back up and try again. This is something that they have forgotten how to do. We are so afraid of failure that we do not try anything new at all." She walked to the center of the room and faced him. Her 4 eyes were bright with a desperate hope. "I want you to give us back what we have lost, Commander. I want you to teach us how to be alive again." Jake felt the weight of her words pressing down on him like a heavy stone. "How could I possibly do that? I am just one man, and I am not a teacher or a philosopher. I am a soldier." "That is exactly why you are perfect for this task," Ra said. "We do not need more books or lectures. We have had enough of those. We need someone who lives the way humans live, someone who acts without thinking too much, someone who is not afraid to be wrong." She walked to a door at the far end of the room and opened it. Beyond was another hallway. "Come, there is something I must show you." They walked for several minutes through the private areas of the palace. Finally, they reached a large room with a window that looked out onto a courtyard. In the courtyard, about 100 young were standing in neat rows. They looked like teenagers, though Jake was not sure how to tell the age of an alien. "These are the children of our highest nobles," the Empress explained. "They are the future leaders of our empire, the future generals, scientists, artists, and rulers. They are the best and of our species." Jake watched them through the window. They stood perfectly still, not talking to each other, not moving. Their faces showed no emotion at all. "They have never known struggle," Ra said. "They have never faced a problem they could not solve with logic. They have never been afraid or confused or surprised. Everything in their lives has been planned and controlled since the day they were born." She turned to Jake, and her voice dropped low. "This is my dark request, Commander. The request that terrified everyone else I asked. I want you to teach these children to be human. I want you to teach them to fail, to feel fear, to be surprised, to create without knowing if their creation will be good or bad, to laugh and cry and hope and dream. Jake felt his mouth go dry. You want me to teach them to be imperfect? Yes, because perfection is death. Only imperfection is truly alive. For a long moment, Jake said nothing. He watched the young in the courtyard. They were so still, so controlled, so empty. And yet, they were also just children. Children who had never been allowed to be young. The noble families will hate this, he said finally. They will see me as corrupting their children. Many of them already do. There are those in my empire who think I am mad for bringing you here. Some of them may try to stop you. Some of them may try to kill you. Jake thought about this. He thought about the danger. He thought about how impossible the task seemed. He thought about his crew waiting for him on the Valiant. And then he thought about what it would mean if he succeeded. Not just but for all species. If humans could teach the most powerful empire in the galaxy how to live again, it would change everything. It would prove that humanity had something valuable to offer the universe. I will do it, he said. The Empress closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet with tears. Jake had not known that could cry. Thank you, Commander, she whispered. You may be the last hope my people have. Jake looked out at the young aliens who would become his students. He had no idea how he was going to do this. He only knew that he had to try. Because that was what humans did. They tried, even when success seemed impossible. The training building had been prepared according to Jake's instructions. The engineers had built everything he asked for, though they clearly did not understand why he wanted such strange things. There was an obstacle course with moving parts that changed every time someone went through it. There was a room with broken machines that could not be fixed with normal tools. There were test papers with questions that had no correct answers. The engineers thought Jake was crazy. Maybe he was, but he knew what he was doing. On the first day, Jake stood in front of his 100 students. The young towered over him, some of them almost twice his height. Their scaled faces showed a mix of emotions. Some looked confused. Some looked angry. Some looked at him like he was an insect that had crawled into their food. My name is Commander, Jake began. For the next year, I will be your teacher. A voice interrupted him before he could say anything else. What could a human possibly teach us? The speaker was a young male near the front of the group. He was tall even for with dark blue scales and 4 eyes that burned with contempt. Jake had been told about him. His name was X, and his father was General X, one of the most powerful military commanders in the Empire. Your species is young and weak, X continued. We built ships that traveled between stars while you were still learning to make fire. What wisdom could you have that we do not already possess? Jake had expected this. He was not upset. In fact, he smiled. You are right, he said. Humans are young compared to we are smaller, we are weaker. We make mistakes all the time. He began walking through the rows of students, looking up at their faces. So tell me, X, when was the last time they made a mistake? The young noble's face twisted with confusion. We do not make mistakes. Our systems are perfect. Our methods are flawless. And when was the last time you learned something completely new, something that surprised you, something that changed the way you think? Silence fell over the room. None of the students had an answer. Jake nodded. Here is your first lesson. Perfection is the end of growth. A species that never fails can never learn, can never change, can never adapt when something unexpected happens. He pulled a small device from his pocket and pressed a button. Suddenly, the gravity in the room shifted. It was not a big change, but it was enough to make several students stumble. Some of them fell to the floor, their perfect balance destroyed by the unexpected shift. X caught himself, his warrior training kicking in, but Jake saw something in his eyes that had not been there before. Surprise. Your second lesson, Jake said as the gravity returned to normal. The universe does not care about your perfection. It will throw chaos at you when you least expect it. The question is not whether this will happen. The question is whether you can handle it when it does. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Jake's life. He had to tear down everything these young believed about themselves and build something new in its place. It was like trying to teach rocks to dance. He taught them to play poker. They had never seen a game where you won by lying. The concept of bluffing was so foreign to them that some of them could not do it at all. They would hold good cards and their faces would show their happiness. They would hold bad cards and their faces would show their disappointment. They could not understand why hiding the truth would ever be useful. But slowly some of them began to learn. A young female with silver scales was the first to bluff successfully. She tricked X into folding a winning hand, and the look on his face was something Jake would never forget. It was shock, then anger, and then something else. Something that looked like respect. Jake showed them human art. Paintings that did not try to show things exactly as they were, but instead tried to show emotions and feelings. Music that broke all the mathematical rules that composers followed. Poetry that made no logical sense but still somehow touched the heart. At first the students hated it. They called it chaos. They called it madness. They called it ugly and wrong. But then one night, Jake found her sitting alone in a corner of the training building. She was writing something on a piece of paper. When he looked over her shoulder, he saw that it was a poem. It was clumsy and strange, and it broke every rule of writing, but it was hers. "Is this acceptable?" she asked, looking up at him with uncertain eyes. Jake read the poem again. It was about the feeling of watching a star die. It was sad and beautiful and completely unlike anything I had written in centuries. "It is more than acceptable," he said. "It is wonderful." 3 months into the training, Lieutenant Amy arrived from the Valiant. She had been assigned to help Jake with his mission. She found him exhausted, thinner than before, but with a light in his eyes that she had never seen. "You look terrible," she said when she saw him. "I have never worked harder in my life," he admitted. "But Amy, it is working. They are changing." He told her about X, who had told a joke the day before. It was a bad joke, and nobody laughed, but the fact that he had tried was incredible. He told her about Anne and her poetry, which was getting better every day. He told her about a student named who had started building strange sculptures out of broken machine parts, just because he liked the way they looked. "The Empress came to watch my class yesterday," Jake said. "When she saw what the students were doing, she started crying. She said she had not seen anything so beautiful in 500 years. Amy studied him carefully. "And how is your relationship with the Empress?" Jake paused. His relationship with Ra had become complicated. She visited his classes often, standing in the shadows and watching. And they talked late into the night about philosophy, about what it meant to be alive, about the nature of consciousness and creativity. She was brilliant and curious, and not at all like the terrifying queen he had met on his first day. "She is hopeful," Jake said finally, "maybe for the first time in centuries." But not everyone in the Empire shared that hope. Jake had started hearing whispers from the noble houses. Many of them were angry about what he was doing. A human teaching their children, filling their heads with chaos and disorder. Some called it an insult. Some called it a crime. Some called it an act of war. General X's father was the loudest voice against Jake's program. He called the training an abomination. He demanded that the Empress stop it immediately. When she refused, he became quiet, too quiet. Jake knew that something bad was coming. He could feel it in the air like a storm building on the horizon, but he did not know when it would arrive or what form it would take. What he did know was that his students were changing. They were learning to question, to create, to fail, and try again. They were becoming something new, something they had not seen in a very long time. They were becoming alive. And that was worth any danger that might be coming. Jake was sure of it. He just hoped he was right. The attack came at midnight, 6 months after Jake had started teaching. He was sleeping in his small room in the training building when the first explosion shook the walls. Jake opened his eyes and saw dust falling from the ceiling. Red emergency lights flashed on. Alarms screamed through the corridors. He jumped out of bed and grabbed the weapon that the Empress had given him. It was a ceremonial blade, beautiful but not very practical in a real fight. He wished he had a gun instead. His door burst open and Amy ran in. Her face was pale and she was breathing hard. "It is a coup," she said. "General X has made his move. He has taken control of the military command center. His soldiers are moving through the city. They are calling for the Empress to be removed from power." Jake felt his stomach drop. He had known this was coming, but he had hoped they would have more time. "What about our students?" he asked. Amy's face became even more pale. "X has declared them corrupted, contaminated by human influence. He has ordered his soldiers to kill them all." Jake felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. It was not fear. It was anger. Those were his students. He had watched them grow from arrogant nobles into something new and better. He had seen them learn to laugh, to create, to question. He would not let them die. "Where is the Empress?" "Trapped in the throne room. X has it surrounded. His best soldiers are guarding every entrance." Jake thought quickly. They were outnumbered. They were. The Imperial military was the best trained force in the galaxy. By every logical measure, they had no chance at all. But Jake had spent 6 months teaching his students that logic was not everything. It was time to see if they had learned. He ran to the central hall of the training building where he found his students gathered together. They looked scared. Some of them were wounded, but they were organized. And standing at the front of the group, giving orders and keeping everyone calm, was X. The young noble turned when Jake entered. His face was hard, but his eyes showed pain. "My father has betrayed the Empress," X said. "He has betrayed our people. He struggled to find the words. "I renounce him. I stand with the Queen." "So do we all," said a stepping forward. The others raised their voices in agreement. Jake looked at them. 100 young who had learned to embrace chaos, to find strength in uncertainty, to act without a perfect plan. They were scared. They had every right to be, but they were not frozen. They were not waiting to be told what to do. "Your father's soldiers are trained for perfect warfare," Jake told X. "They follow protocols. They execute flawless strategies. Every move they make is part of a calculated plan." X nodded. "That is how military doctrine works." "So what do we do to perfect strategies?" A smile crossed X's face. It was a human expression that he had learned over the past months. "We introduce chaos," he said. The next few hours were a blur of impossible tactics and desperate gambits. Jake led his students through the palace using paths that made no military sense. They went through kitchens and maintenance tunnels and ceremonial gardens. They split up and came back together. They made noise in one place while moving silently in another. The Imperial soldiers were confused. Their training had not prepared them for enemies who did not follow any recognizable pattern. Every time they thought they knew where the students were going, the students went somewhere else. Every time they set a trap, the students walked around it. Jake used every lesson he had taught over the past 6 months. Random movements, unpredictable decisions, actions that seemed like mistakes but were actually part of a larger plan that only made sense if you stopped thinking logically. They fought when they had to. Many of the students were wounded. 2 were killed, and Jake felt each death like a knife in his heart. But they kept moving. They kept fighting. They kept refusing to give up. The most dangerous moment came when they reached the old tower near the center of the palace. X's forces had caught up with them. 100 Imperial soldiers were closing in from all sides. "We are trapped," Amy said. "There is nowhere to go." X looked at the tower, then at the soldiers approaching. "The tower is unstable. My teachers told me that when I was young. They said it should have been torn down years ago, but no one ever did. Jake understood immediately how unstable. Very. A single explosion in the right place would bring the whole thing down. That would kill us too. Not if we are not inside when it falls. X looked at him. It is not a logical plan. It is a terrible plan, but it might work. Jake smiled. That is the most human thing you have ever said. They moved quickly. X led a group of students toward the soldiers in what looked like a suicidal charge. The Imperial forces moved to meet them, thinking this was the final stand. But at the last moment, X and his group changed direction and ran into the tower. The soldiers followed. Amy had placed the explosives that Jake's team carried. As soon as the last student escaped through a hidden exit, she pressed the button. The tower came down with a roar like the end of the world. Dust and stone filled the air. The soldiers inside never had a chance. By dawn, they had reached the throne room. The doors were guarded by X's remaining elite soldiers, but the students had learned much in the past 6 months. They had learned that surprise was more powerful than strength. They had learned that enemies who expect you to act one way can be defeated by acting another way. The battle was short and brutal. When it was over, Jake led his students into the throne room. Empress Ra stood before her throne, wounded but still standing. General X was in front of her, his weapon raised, ready to end her life. He turned when the doors opened and his eyes went wide. "Impossible," he said. "My soldiers should have killed all of you." X stepped forward, placing himself between his father and the Empress. "Your soldiers were perfect," X said. "That is why they lost." Father and son stared at each other. X looked at the young before him, at the fire in his eyes, at the way he held himself, at the strange confidence that came not from knowing he would win, but from accepting that he might lose and fighting anyway. "What have you become?" the general whispered. X smiled that human smile again. "I have become the future." For a long moment nobody moved. Then General X lowered his weapon. It fell from his hand and clattered on the floor. One by one, his remaining soldiers did the same. The coup was over. Jake stood in the throne room surrounded by his students, looking at the general who had tried to kill them all. They had won. Against all odds, against all logic, they had won. And he knew that the would never be the same again. 1 year had passed since Jake first stepped onto Prime. 1 year since he had stood before the Empress in terror, waiting to hear her dark request. 1 year since he had agreed to do the impossible. Now he stood in the throne room once again, but everything was different. The cold, dark chamber that had frightened him so much was full of color and life. Paintings covered the walls, not the old pictures of conquest and destruction, but new art created by the young who had rediscovered how to create. Strange and beautiful sculptures stood in corners. Music played somewhere in the distance, melodies that did not follow any mathematical rules but somehow made the soul want to dance. The throne room was full of people. Not just the noble families, but common citizens who had come to see the human who had changed their world. They watched Jake with wonder in their 4 eyes. Some of them bowed their heads as he passed. Some of them whispered words of thanks. Empress Ra walked toward him through the crowd. She had changed too. She moved differently now, with a lightness that had not been there before. Her ancient eyes, which had once been filled with despair, now sparkled with something Jake had never expected to see in an alien queen: joy. "Commander," she said, "you have done what no one believed was possible. You have given us back our fire." Jake shook his head. "I only showed them the door, Your Majesty. They walked through it themselves." The Empress smiled. It was a real smile, not the terrifying expression Jake remembered from their first meeting. This was the smile of someone who had found hope after centuries of darkness. "You are too modest," she said, "but that is a very human thing to be." The throne room continued to fill with his students. They were not students anymore, Jake reminded himself. They were leaders now, Innovators, creators, the future of the Empire. X entered with a group of young soldiers behind him. After the coup, he had been named commander of a new military force. But this was not like the old Imperial Army. These soldiers trained to adapt instead of to follow orders blindly. They learned to expect the unexpected, to think for themselves, to find new solutions when old ones failed. A came next. Her poetry had started a cultural revolution. Young across the empire were reading her words and being inspired to create their own art. Theaters had opened for the first time in hundreds of years. Musicians were writing new songs. Painters were exploring styles that no had ever tried before. Was with her. His sculptures had become famous throughout the 17 star systems. He made them from broken machines and discarded materials, turning trash into beauty. It was a very human thing to do, and they loved it. Jake watched them all gather around him. He thought about how much they had changed, how much he had changed too. When he first came here, he had been afraid. He had doubted whether a single human could make any difference at all. Now he knew the truth. Humans had something special, not technology, not military strength, not intelligence or logic or perfect planning. Humans had the ability to embrace chaos, to fail and try again, to dream impossible dreams and make them real through sheer stubbornness. This was what he had given them, and they had taken it and made it their own. Amy appeared at his side. She had been busy for the past few weeks, communicating with Earth Command. "They have finally sent word," she said. "Earth wants you to come home. They are talking about medals and promotions. Some people think you should be made an ambassador." Jake looked around the throne room. He looked at the art and heard the music. He watched his former students talking and laughing and arguing about ideas. He felt the energy in the air, the sense that anything was possible. "Tell them I need more time," he said. "I have learned as much from thee as they have learned from me, about patience, about perspective, about what an entire species can become when it chooses to grow." Amy nodded. She did not seem surprised by his answer. The Empress had been listening. She walked over to Jake and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Her claws, which had once seemed so dangerous, now felt almost friendly. "Stay as long as you wish, Jake," she said. "You will always have a home among us. You will always be welcome on Prime." Jake felt something warm in his chest. When he had first come here, he had expected to die. He had expected the worst. Instead, he had found something amazing. He had found a people who needed what he could give, and he had found that giving it to them had changed him too. He thought about Earth, about the stars, about all the other species out there in the vast darkness of space. Humanity was young and small, but humanity had something that even ancient empires needed: the courage to be imperfect, the strength to fall down and get back up, the ability to look at the impossible and say, "Let us try anyway." "You know," Jake said, "when I first came here, I was terrified. I was a tiny human standing before an alien queen, waiting to hear some dark request that would probably kill me." "And now?" Amy asked. Jake smiled. "Now I understand. The Empress was not asking me to do something terrible. She was asking me to share the most human thing of all, the courage to be imperfect, to stumble forward into the unknown, to fail and learn and try again, to be truly alive." Outside the throne room windows, the twin suns of Prime were setting. The sky turned purple and gold, the most beautiful sunset Jake had ever seen on any world. And somewhere in the distance, he could hear a sound that made his heart sing. Children laughing. Children actually laughing, playing games with no rules, making up stories with no logic, being young and foolish and wonderful in ways that their species had forgotten for generations. It was the most beautiful sound Jake had ever heard. X came to stand beside him, looking out at the sunset. "I used to think humans were beneath us," the young said. "I thought you were weak and foolish and had nothing to teach us. And now..." X was quiet for a moment. Now I think that weakness and foolishness are sometimes the greatest strengths of all. You taught us to fail, Commander, and in learning to fail, we learn to live again." Jake nodded. He did not need to say anything. The sunset and the laughter and the art on the walls said it all. The Empire had been reborn. Birth rates were rising for the first time in 300 years. Scientists were making new discoveries every month. Philosophers were asking questions that no one had asked for centuries. The young were dreaming dreams that the old had forgotten how to dream. And it had all started with one human, one small, imperfect human who had been brave enough to try. Jake stayed at the window until the last light faded from the sky. Behind him, the throne room buzzed with conversation and music and life. Somewhere, A was reading a new poem. Somewhere else was explaining his latest sculpture. The Empress was laughing at a joke that X had told. A year ago, none of this would have been possible. A year ago, they were dying slowly, perfectly, silently. Now they were alive. Messy and chaotic and imperfect and gloriously, wonderfully alive. Jake had been called before an alien queen. Her dark request had terrified him, but he had said yes anyway. And that, he thought, was the most human thing of all. The end.